When Pope Leo XIV stepped out of his armoured vehicle onto the rain-slicked streets of East London that Tuesday morning, he had no idea that his simple desire for an ordinary lunch would spark an international incident that would dominate headlines for weeks. The decision he was about to make, against every protocol, every security recommendation, every careful plan, would set in motion a chain of events that would test not only his own faith, but the very soul of a woman whose hatred ran deeper than anyone could imagine. The Holy Father pulled his black coat tighter against the October chill as he approached the weathered doors of St. Margaret's homeless shelter. Cardinal Alessandro walked beside him, their breath forming small clouds in the crisp air. Security personnel maintained their distance, but their watchful eyes never left the Pope's figure. "Your Holiness," Cardinal Alessandro murmured as they paused at the shelter entrance. "The schedule allows only 45 minutes here before we must return for the afternoon audiences." Pope Leo XIV smiled, his weathered hands already reaching for the door handle. "Alessandro, my friend, schedules are made by men, but these people inside, they live by God's time, not ours." Inside the shelter, the familiar sense of strong tea and industrial soap filled the air. Pope Leo moved naturally among the residents, his presence somehow both extraordinary and perfectly ordinary. He knelt beside elderly George, whose arthritis-gnarled hands shook as he held his morning cup. He listened to Sarah's quiet concerns about her teenage son. He blessed the forehead of little Thomas, whose mother had brought him here when nowhere else would take them in. "Father," whispered Margaret, the shelter director, as she approached the Pope near the kitchen, "there's been another development with the family I mentioned yesterday. Young Emma's fever hasn't broken." Pope Leo's expression grew serious. He closed his eyes briefly, lips moving in silent prayer. When he opened them, Cardinal Alessandro saw a familiar look, the same expression that had preceded many of the Pope's most controversial decisions during his papacy. "Alessandro," Pope Leo said quietly, but with unmistakable resolve, "cancel the afternoon appointments. We're staying in London for lunch. Your Holiness, the security protocols will adapt." Pope Leo's voice carried gentle authority. "These people face uncertainty every day without armed guards or bulletproof glass. Surely the Vicar of Christ can manage one ordinary meal in this beautiful city." Cardinal Alessandro sighed, recognizing the futility of argument when Pope Leo XIV had made up his mind. He began reaching for his phone to contact their security detail, unaware that his next call would set them on a collision course with destiny. The Wellington Club stood like a fortress of privilege on Berkeley Square, its Georgian facade polished to an intimidating gleam. Brass nameplate and crystal windows reflected the grey London sky, while perfectly manicured topiaries flanked the entrance like silent sentries. Pope Leo XIV paused on the sidewalk, taking in the establishment that Cardinal Alessandro had chosen. From their hotel concierge's recommendations, perhaps we should have selected somewhere less. Cardinal Alessandro hesitated, searching for the right word, as he observed the restaurant's austere grandeur. "Less what?" Pope Leo asked with gentle amusement. "Less beautiful? God appreciates beauty, my friend, even when it comes wrapped in formality." The doorman, resplendent in a burgundy uniform with gold braiding, approached with measured steps. His trained eyes swept over the two men in simple black clerical attire, and Pope Leo caught the almost imperceptible tightening around the man's eyes. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," the doorman said, his voice carrying just enough politeness to avoid offense while making clear this was not their usual clientele. "Do you have a reservation?" "We were hoping you might accommodate 2 humble visitors to London," Pope Leo replied warmly. "And nothing elaborate, just a quiet table for lunch." The doorman's pause lasted a fraction too long. "I shall inquire with the hostess, though we are rather fully booked today." He opened the heavy glass door with reluctance rather than welcome. Inside, The Wellington Club's interior whispered of old money and older prejudices. Dark wood panelling rose to meet coffered ceilings, while oil paintings of stern-faced men in military uniforms gazed down from gilded frames. Crystal chandeliers cast pools of golden light over tables dressed in starched white linen, where well-heeled patrons conversed in muted tones. The hostess, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled into an unforgiving chignon, approached their station near the entrance. Her smile appeared to have been professionally calibrated, present but not particularly warm. "I'm terribly sorry," she began before the doorman had finished explaining their request, "but I'm afraid we're completely committed for this afternoon. Perhaps somewhere more suitable might be available in the area." Pope Leo XIV's expression remained serene, but Cardinal Alessandro felt his own jaw tighten. The dismissal was courteous but unmistakable. They were being politely but firmly discouraged from entering this bastion of British respectability. "Of course," Pope Leo said gently, "we understand completely." Just then, a silver-haired gentleman at a nearby table looked up from his Financial Times, his eyes widening slightly as they fell upon the Pope's distinctive features. He leaned forward, squinting slightly, then reached for his phone. "Actually," the hostess said suddenly, her tone shifting with practiced efficiency, "perhaps we could arrange something after all. A table has just become available." Victoria Ashworth emerged from the manager's office like a predator, sensing disruption in her carefully ordered domain. Her Hermes heels clicked against the polished marble floor with military precision as she surveyed the dining room, her steel-grey eyes immediately finding the source of her displeasure. Two men in clerical black being seated by her hostess. At 43, Victoria had clawed her way to management through Cambridge economics, family connections, and an unwavering belief that sentiment was the enemy of success. The Wellington Club represented everything she valued: exclusivity, rationality, and freedom from what she considered the superstitious nonsense that had plagued humanity for centuries. "Margaret," she called sharply to the hostess, her cultured accent carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. "A word," the hostess approached nervously, glancing back at Pope Leo XIV and Cardinal Alessandro as they followed a young waiter deeper into the restaurant. "Table 12? Victoria's voice could have frozen champagne. "You seated them at table 12? The gentleman seemed rather distinguished, and Mr. Pemberton appeared to recognize. "Table 12 overlooks the garden. It's one of our finest positions." Victoria's jaw tightened as she watched the two clerics settling into their chairs. Religious types prefer darker corners, where they can whisper their incantations without disturbing civilized conversation. She strode across the dining room, her movements cutting through the genteel atmosphere like a blade. The young waiter, James, was just placing water glasses on the table when Victoria arrived. "James," she said, her smile as brittle as autumn leaves, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. These gentlemen would be much more comfortable at table 27. Table 27 sat tucked behind a support column near the kitchen. Service doors, partially concealed from the main dining room and subject to the constant traffic of staff carrying steaming plates and dirty dishes. Pope Leo XIV looked up with genuine warmth as Victoria approached. "Good afternoon. What a lovely establishment you have here." "Thank you," Victoria replied, her professional courtesy masking the disdain churning beneath. "I'm Victoria Ashworth, the manager. I'm afraid there's been a small error with your seating. If you'd be so kind as to follow me to a table that would better suit your particular needs." Cardinal Alessandro's eyebrows rose slightly, but Pope Leo XIV simply nodded graciously. "Of course, we're grateful for any accommodation." As they gathered their things, Victoria caught James's arm with a grip that would leave finger marks. "Minimal service," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but sharp as broken glass. "Water, basic menu, quick turnaround. We run a restaurant, not a monastery." James's young face flushed with discomfort, but he nodded reluctantly. Victoria watched with satisfaction as the two men were relocated to the shadows near the kitchen, their presence now properly contained where it belonged, out of sight of her discerning clientele. From across the room, Lord Pemberton lowered his newspaper, his phone now recording discreetly as he watched the unfolding drama with growing interest. The relocated table sat in the restaurant's forgotten corner, where the elegant ambiance gave way to practical necessity. Steam from the kitchen periodically wafted through the service doors, and the constant murmur of staff instructions created a backdrop that made intimate conversation nearly impossible. Pope Leo XIV settled into his chair with the same grace he might have shown at a state dinner. "The acoustics are quite different here," Cardinal Alessandro observed dryly, raising his voice slightly as a waiter bustled past with a tray of steaming plates. "Perhaps it will help us appreciate the silence when we find it," Pope Leo replied, reaching into his coat pocket. He withdrew a small, well-worn prayer book, its leather cover softened by years of handling, and placed it gently beside his water glass. James approached their table with obvious discomfort, his youthful face flushed from either the kitchen heat or embarrassment at their treatment. "I'm terribly sorry about the relocation, fathers. Would you care to see our lunch menu?" "That would be wonderful, thank you," Pope Leo XIV smiled warmly. "And please, don't trouble yourself about the table. We're quite comfortable." As James distributed the menus, his eyes fell upon the prayer book. He hesitated, glancing nervously toward the main dining room where Victoria Ashworth could be seen, moving between tables like a general inspecting troops. "Perhaps," James began carefully, "you might prefer to keep your personal items in your coat pocket. Ms. Ashworth can be rather particular about table presentations." Before Pope Leo XIV could respond, Victoria's voice cut through the ambient noise like a scalpel. "James!" She had materialized beside their table with the silent efficiency of someone who had perfected the art of surveillance. "I see we have a presentation issue," her eyes fixed on the prayer book with the intensity of someone spotting a venomous snake. "I'm afraid the Wellington Club maintains strict policies regarding personal displays that might make other diners uncomfortable. Religious materials fall under that category." Pope Leo XIV regarded her with calm interest. "Of course, I certainly wouldn't wish to make anyone uncomfortable." He reached for the book, but Victoria's hand shot out, stopping just short of touching it. "Actually, I prefer to handle policy violations myself," she said, her professional smile stretching thin. "It ensures consistency in our standards." She picked up the prayer book between two fingers, as if it might contaminate her, holding it at arm's length. "James will store this safely with your coats until your departure." Cardinal Alessandro's jaw tightened visibly, but Pope Leo XIV placed a gentle hand on his friend's arm. "That's very thoughtful, Miss Ashworth. Thank you for accommodating our visit." Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly at his easy compliance, as if she had expected, perhaps even hoped for, resistance. "The Wellington Club prides itself on maintaining an atmosphere where all our guests can dine without distractions." As she walked away with the prayer book, James lingered uncomfortably. "Your Holiness," he whispered, the words escaping before he could stop them. Victoria's head snapped around, her predatory instincts immediately alert to the shift in tone. Lord Pemberton's phone trembled slightly in his weathered hands as he discreetly positioned it to capture the scene unfolding near the kitchen doors. At 72, the retired diplomat had attended enough papal audiences during his Foreign Office career to recognize Pope Leo XIV's distinctive profile, even partially obscured by shadows and steam from the service entrance. "Extraordinary," he murmured to himself, thumb hovering over the record button as Victoria Ashworth stalked away with the confiscated prayer book. At the adjacent table, Mrs. Whitfield, wife of a prominent barrister, leaned toward her luncheon companion. "Darling, do you see those two gentlemen by the kitchen? There's something rather familiar about the older one." Her friend, Lady Catherine Bramwell, squinted through her reading glasses. "Religious sorts, from the look of it, though I must say there's something distinguished about his bearing." James returned to Pope Leo XIV's table with visible internal conflict written across his young features. His Catholic upbringing warred with his need for employment as he approached the two clerics with their menus. "Might I suggest the Dover sole, your—" James caught himself, glancing nervously toward Victoria, who was speaking tersely with the hostess. "Might I suggest the Dover sole, Father? It's prepared simply but excellently." Pope Leo XIV's eyes crinkled with gentle understanding. "That sounds perfect, James, and please don't let our presence cause you any distress." "It's not right," James whispered, his voice barely audible above the kitchen noise. "The way she's treating you. My grandmother would box my ears if she knew I was part of this." Cardinal Alessandro leaned forward. "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." "She is, Your Grace. Raised 6 children and never missed Sunday Mass." James's face flushed with sudden realization of what he'd just revealed. "I mean, she's very traditional in her faith." Across the dining room, other patrons began to take notice. A gentleman in a Savile Row suit paused mid-conversation, his gaze lingering on the Pope's serene profile. 2 women at a window table whispered, behind their wine glasses, phones emerging from designer handbags as recognition dawned. Victoria noticed the shift in atmosphere immediately. Her predatory instincts, honed by years of managing an exclusive establishment, detected the subtle change in her dining room's energy. Conversations had grown quieter, heads turned more frequently toward the corner table, and several phones were now pointed discreetly in that direction. She intercepted James as he headed toward the kitchen with their order. "I notice you're spending considerable time with table 27, she said, her voice carrying ice. "They're here for a meal, not a consultation. Keep the service professional and brief." James nodded reluctantly, but his eyes held a new defiance that Victoria found deeply unsettling. Lord Pemberton adjusted his phone's angle, capturing Victoria's increasingly agitated movements as she patrolled the dining room like a warden sensing unrest among the prisoners. The stage was set, the witnesses positioned, and the powder keg of recognition beginning to smoulder. The elderly woman approached with hesitant steps, her arthritis-gnarled hand clutching her husband's arm for support. Margaret Hartwell had spent 47 years married to Edmund, a former RAF pilot whose hands now shook from Parkinson's disease. She had recognized Pope Leo XIV despite the poor lighting and deliberate obscurity of his corner table. "Edmund," she whispered urgently to her husband. "It's him, it's actually him." Edmund Hartwell squinted through his thick glasses, his weathered face brightening with recognition. "By Jove, Maggie, you're right." The couple had been seated 3 tables away, close enough to witness Victoria's treatment of the 2 clerics, close enough to see the confiscated prayer book and the deliberate relegation to the worst table in the restaurant. Margaret's Catholic faith, strengthened by decades of attending St. Patrick's in Kensington, compelled her forward. "Excuse me, Your Holiness," she said softly, approaching Pope Leo XIV with the reverence of someone who had waited her entire life for such a moment. "I'm terribly sorry to disturb your meal, but my husband begins treatment tomorrow for his condition, and I wondered—" Her voice faltered with emotion. "Might you offer a small blessing?" Pope Leo XIV's face lit with gentle warmth. "Of course. My dear lady, it would be my honor." He began to rise from his chair when Victoria Ashworth materialized between them like an avenging angel of secular propriety. "Absolutely not," she declared, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent dining. room. This is not a cathedral, madam, it's a restaurant. If you require religious services, I suggest you visit Westminster Cathedral. Margaret Hartwell's face flushed deep crimson, her hand trembling as she stepped backward. I'm terribly sorry. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. Mrs. Hartwell, please, Pope Leo XIV said gently, his voice carrying despite Victoria's imposing presence. There's no trouble at all. There most certainly is trouble, Victoria snapped, turning to face Pope Leo XIV directly. You're encouraging behavior that violates our establishment standards. This is a place of business, not a shrine. Edmund Hartwell struggled to stand, his walker scraping against the marble floor. Now see here, young lady. My wife was simply... Your wife was disrupting other diners with religious theatre. Victoria cut him off brutally. I've already been more than accommodating by allowing you to remain despite clear policy violations. The dining room had fallen into absolute silence. Forks hung suspended over plates, wine glasses frozen halfway to lips. Lord Pemberton's phone captured every devastating moment as the elderly couple retreated to their table in humiliation. Cardinal Alessandro's hands clenched into fists beneath the tablecloth, but Pope Leo XIV placed a restraining touch on his. Miss Ashworth, Pope Leo XIV said quietly, his voice carrying infinite sadness. Kindness costs nothing, yet enriches everyone it touches. Victoria's eyes blazed with something beyond professional duty, something personal and deeply bitter. Save your platitudes for people gullible enough to believe them, she replied, her voice dripping with contempt. Victoria remained standing beside their table like a prosecutor delivering a closing argument, her presence casting a shadow over the untouched Dover soul cooling on Pope Leo XIV's plate. The entire dining room had become an unwilling courtroom, every patron a reluctant juror in this unexpected trial between faith and reason. You speak of kindness, Victoria continued, her voice rising with passionate conviction, yet your institution has spent centuries teaching people to fear their own humanity, to grovel before invisible beings, instead of standing proud in their own strength. Pope Leo XIV regarded her with the same patient attention he might give a troubled parishioner. What has caused you such pain, my daughter? The question struck Victoria like a physical blow. For a fraction of a second, her armor of professional composure cracked, revealing something raw and wounded beneath. Her jaw tightened as she fought to maintain control. Don't, she whispered, then caught herself, raising her voice again. Don't you dare patronize me with your psychological manipulation. I've seen enough of religion's damage to last several lifetimes. Sometimes our greatest anger springs from our deepest wounds, Pope Leo XIV replied gently. The Church has failed many people, and if it failed you, failed me. Victoria's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. Your people convinced my mother that her cancer was God's plan, that suffering was noble, that prayer mattered more than treatment. Her voice dropped to a venomous whisper. She died believing she deserved her agony. The dining room held its collective breath. Even the kitchen noise seemed to fade as Victoria's personal hell spilled into the rarefied air of the Wellington Club. Cardinal Alessandro's face softened with genuine compassion, but Victoria caught the expression and recoiled, as if struck. Don't. You dare pity me, she snarled. I freed myself from your fairy tales. I choose reason over superstition, science over mythology, reality over false comfort. Yet you seem anything but free, Pope Leo XIV observed quietly. Pain that controls our actions isn't freedom, it's another form of prison. Victoria's hands trembled with rage. Several diners shifted uncomfortably, sensing they were witnessing something too intimate, too devastating for public consumption. How dare you, she breathed, her professional facade completely shattered now. How dare you analyze my choices when your entire existence is built on exploiting human weakness? "I see strength in you," Pope Leo XIV replied, his voice carrying across the silent restaurant. "Tremendous strength born from tremendous suffering, but strength without compassion becomes cruelty." Lord Pemberton's phone captured the moment when Victoria's face transformed from rage to something far more dangerous. Cold, calculating fury that spoke of a woman pushed beyond all reasonable limits. The confrontation had moved beyond ideology into something deeply personal, and everyone present sensed that the next words spoken would determine whether this encounter ended in reconciliation or complete destruction. The sharp trill of Pope Leo XIV's mobile phone cut through the charged atmosphere like a blade, causing several diners to startle. Victoria stepped back slightly as the Pope glanced at the screen, his expression immediately shifting from calm engagement to grave concern. "Forgive me," he said quietly. "This is about little Emma from this morning." Without waiting for permission, he answered the call. "Dr. Morrison, yes, I've been expecting your call." The dining room fell into absolute silence, the kind of hushed attention usually reserved for theatrical performances. Every ear strained to catch fragments of the conversation as Pope Leo XIV listened intently to the voice on the other end. "You see," the Pope said softly, his weathered hand gripping the phone more tightly. "How much time do the doctors believe she has?" Victoria's face darkened as she realized this private moment was unfolding in her carefully controlled public space. She began to gesture impatiently, but Pope Leo XIV's next words stopped her cold. "Please tell her parents that she remains in my prayers," he continued, "and that her courage this morning touched my heart more deeply than she could know." As the call ended, Pope Leo XIV closed his eyes and slowly, deliberately made the sign of the cross. His lips moved in silent prayer for the dying child whose fever had not broken, whose small body was losing its battle against forces beyond medical intervention. "No." Victoria's voice cracked like a whip across the silent restaurant. "Absolutely not." Before anyone could react, she slammed her palm down on the table with explosive force. Plates jumped, silverware clattered, and water glasses tipped over, sending streams of ice water cascading across the white tablecloth and onto Pope Leo XIV's lap. "I expressly forbade religious displays in this establishment," she shouted, her voice echoing off the coffered ceiling. "That includes your superstitious gestures over a dying child." Cardinal Alessandro leaped to his feet, trying to avoid the spreading puddle, his face flushed with indignation. "This is unconscionable!" "A 7-year-old girl is dying," Pope Leo XIV said quietly, water dripping from his sleeves as he remained seated. "And you're concerned about hand gestures? I'm concerned about reality versus delusion," Victoria screamed, her composure completely shattered. "That child needs medicine, not mumbled words to an imaginary friend." The entire restaurant sat frozen in horror. Lord Pemberton's phone captured every shocking moment as Victoria's rage reached its crescendo. James the waiter stood paralyzed by the kitchen doors, a towel clutched uselessly in his hands. "Your prayers won't save her," Victoria continued, her voice breaking with something that might have been tears or fury. "Just like they didn't save my mother, just like they never save anyone when it actually matters." The accusation hung in the air like incense, heavy and suffocating as the full scope of Victoria's spiritual warfare became devastatingly clear to every witness present. Victoria stepped around the flooded table, positioning herself directly in front of Pope Leo XIV's chair, her body language abandoning every pretense of professional courtesy. The careful facade she had maintained throughout her career at the Wellington Club crumbled like ancient parchment, revealing the raw fury beneath. "Get out," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Get out of my restaurant." Pope Leo XIV remained, seated, water still dripping from his sleeves, his expression more sorrowful than angry. "Ms. Ashworth, I understand you're in pain." "Don't you dare!" Victoria's voice exploded across the dining room, causing several patrons to physically recoil. She jabbed her finger inches from Pope Leo XIV's face, her perfectly manicured nail trembling with rage. "Don't you dare analyze me, counsel me, or pretend to understand anything about my life." The entire restaurant held its breath. Businessmen sat frozen with forks halfway to their mouths. The elderly Hartwells clutched each other's hands at their table. Margaret's face paled with shock. Lord Pemberton's phone captured every devastating second as Victoria's career imploded in real time. "You're nothing but a parasite in fancy robes," she continued, her finger still pointed at his face. "You prey on desperate people, selling them false hope while children die and mothers suffer and the world burns around us." James rushed forward from the kitchen doors, his young face flushed with desperation. "Miss Ashworth, please. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Victoria whirled on him. "I understand that this man represents everything wrong with human weakness and superstition." "Ma'am," James's voice cracked as he fought for courage, "that's Pope Leo XIV. He's the Holy Father. He was elected just last month." The words hit the dining room like a thunderbolt. Several patrons gasped audibly. Lady Bramwell's wineglass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the marble floor. The sound seemed to echo endlessly in the sudden silence. Victoria's face went through a rapid transformation: surprise, recognition, then something far more dangerous than ignorance: deliberate, calculated hatred. "I don't care if he's the Archbishop of Canterbury," she screamed, her voice reaching a pitch that made crystal glasses vibrate. "This is my domain. I make the rules here, not some medieval relic pretending divine authority." She leaned closer to Pope Leo XIV, her face contorted with years of accumulated rage. "Your God failed my mother. Your prayers failed everyone who ever believed in them, and you can take your blessings and your miracles and your pathetic comfort and get out of my sight." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sound of Victoria's ragged breathing and the distant hum of kitchen equipment. Every eye in the restaurant was fixed on the scene, knowing they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Outside, a black sedan with diplomatic plates pulled up to the curb. The heavy glass doors of the Wellington Club burst open with such force that they struck the brass stoppers with a resounding clang. Charles Whitmore strode through the entrance like an avenging storm, his Savile Row suit impeccable despite his obvious haste, his silver hair swept back from a face carved with authority earned through 40 years of building a restaurant empire. "What in God's name is happening in my establishment?" His voice boomed across the dining room, cutting through Victoria's tirade like a cavalry charge. The sudden appearance of the owner sent shockwaves through the frozen tableau. Victoria spun around, her face draining of color as she realized her world was about to collapse. She straightened her shoulders in a desperate attempt to regain composure, but her trembling hands betrayed her terror. "Mr. Whitmore," she stammered, "I wasn't expecting you today. There's been a difficult situation with some disruptive customers." "Charles." Whitmore's eyes swept past her dismissively, immediately focusing on the soaked table where Pope Leo XIV sat with quiet dignity, water still pooling around his chair. Recognition dawned instantly on the owner's face. He had attended the papal inauguration ceremony in Rome just 6 weeks earlier. "Dear God," Whitmore breathed, his face paling as the full scope of the disaster became clear. Lord Pemberton rose. From his table, phone in hand. "Charles, old boy, I've captured the entire incident. You'll want to see this immediately." Whitmore approached Pemberton's table, his movements sharp with barely controlled fury. As he watched the recording, Victoria's escalating abuse, the spilled water, the finger pointing at the Pope's face, his jaw tightened with each passing second. "This is unconscionable," he murmured, then turned to face Victoria with the cold precision of a headsman approaching the block. "Miss Ashworth, explain yourself. Now." Victoria's mouth opened and closed. like a drowning woman gasping for air. "Sir, these religious fanatics were disrupting our clientele, making scenes, forcing their superstitions." "Religious fanatics?" Whitmore's voice cut through her explanation like a blade. "That religious fanatic is His Holiness Pope Leo XIV, and you've just committed professional suicide in front of half of London's establishment." The weight of her situation crashed down on Victoria like a collapsing building. Her legs nearly buckled as she realized that every phone in the restaurant was recording, that Lord Pemberton's diplomatic connections meant this footage would reach the highest levels of government within hours. "I didn't know," she whispered, but even as the words left her lips, she knew they were inadequate. "It wouldn't matter if he were a parish priest," Whitmore replied coldly. "Your behavior is reprehensible regardless of his station." He turned toward Pope Leo XIV and executed a perfect bow. "Your Holiness, I cannot begin to express my horror and shame at what has occurred in my establishment today." Victoria stood alone in the center of the dining room, her career in ruins, surrounded by witnesses to her spectacular downfall. Charles Whitmore turned from Pope Leo XIV back to Victoria, his face set in granite resolve. The dining room remained, silent as a cathedral, every patron understanding they were witnessing the swift execution of justice in London's most exclusive establishment. "Miss Ashworth," Whitmore's voice carried the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence, "you are terminated. Effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises within the hour." Victoria's legs gave way slightly, forcing her to grip the back of a nearby chair for support. 6 years of climbing the hospitality industry ladder, countless hours of meticulous service, her entire professional reputation, all crumbling into dust in front of London's elite. "Mr. Whitmore, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can explain." "Please," Pope Leo XIV interrupted gently, rising from his water-soaked chair with surprising grace. "There's no need for such harsh measures." Both Whitmore and Victoria stared at him in astonishment. Cardinal Alessandro's eyebrows rose as he recognized the familiar tone his friend used when about to surprise everyone present. "Your Holiness," Whitmore began, confusion evident in his voice, "this woman has publicly humiliated you, violated every principle of hospitality, and created an international incident." "Yes," Pope Leo XIV nodded, stepping closer to Victoria, "who recoiled as if approaching flames, and Christ was spat upon, mocked and crucified. Yet his final words were of forgiveness, not revenge." A murmur rippled through the restaurant. Several diners bowed their heads, moved despite themselves by the Pope's unexpected intervention. "She acts from pain, not malice," Pope Leo XIV continued, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed dining room. "Punishment will only harden that pain into permanent bitterness." Victoria stared at him, tears beginning to track down her cheeks despite her desperate attempts to maintain control. "What do you propose, Your Holiness?" Whitmore asked, torn between his business instincts and his respect for papal authority. "Perhaps Miss Ashworth might spend some time at St. Margaret's Shelter, where I visited this morning," Pope Leo XIV suggested. "See the faces of those who find comfort in faith during their darkest hours, not as punishment, but as education." Victoria's sobs broke free despite her fierce pride. The offer of mercy when she had expected, deserved destruction shattered, something fundamental in her carefully constructed worldview. "I don't understand," she gasped through her tears. "Why would you, after what I said, what I did?" Pope Leo XIV's smile carried infinite sadness and infinite hope. "Because the measure of our faith isn't found in how we treat those who honor us, but in how we respond to those who wound us." Whitmore looked between the Pope and his devastated manager, recognizing he was witnessing something far more powerful than corporate justice. "Very well," he said slowly. "Miss Ashworth, you Have a choice. Victoria stood in the center of the Wellington Club's dining room, surrounded by the wreckage of her career and the unexpected offer of redemption. Her makeup had run in dark streaks down her cheeks, her professional composure utterly destroyed. Yet something in Pope Leo XIV's eyes offered her a lifeline she had never thought to seek. "I accept," she whispered, the words barely audible above the restaurant's hushed atmosphere. "I accept the community service." Charles Whitmore nodded slowly. 2 weeks unpaid suspension, followed by probationary status upon your return. 20 hours at St. Margaret's shelter, as His Holiness suggested. He paused, his voice softening slightly. "Victoria, I've known you for 6 years. This isn't who you truly are." James approached cautiously, carrying fresh towels and a dry tablecloth. "Your Holiness, please allow me to prepare a proper table for you. The Dover sole is excellent, even when reheated." Pope Leo XIV smiled warmly at the young waiter. "Thank you, James, but I believe our time here has served a different purpose than lunch." He turned to Victoria, who was attempting to compose herself with trembling hands. "The shelter opens at 7 each morning. Ask for Margaret. She'll show you where you're needed most." "I don't understand why you're doing this," Victoria said, her voice cracking with exhaustion and confusion. "After everything I said, everything I accused you of." "Because mercy isn't earned," Pope Leo XIV replied gently. "It's given freely, just as it was given to me when I needed it most." Lord Pemberton approached, his phone finally lowered. "Your Holiness, if I may say so, this has been the most extraordinary demonstration of Christian charity I've witnessed in my 72 years. Pope Leo XIV raised his hand in blessing over the entire restaurant. Even those who claimed no religious faith found themselves bowing their heads instinctively, moved by something beyond denominational boundaries. "Peace be with all of you," he said simply. "May we all find the courage to choose compassion over condemnation." As Pope Leo XIV and Cardinal Alessandro prepared to leave, Victoria called out one final time. "Your Holiness?" Her voice was small, vulnerable. "The little girl you mentioned, Emma, is she—" Pope Leo XIV's expression grew grave. "She passed away an hour ago, surrounded by family and love." Victoria's face crumpled as the weight of her earlier words crashed down upon her. She had mocked his prayers for a dying child, dismissed faith's role in comforting the grieving, and now faced the stark reality of her cruelty. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so terribly sorry." "Her parents found peace in their faith," Pope Leo XIV said quietly. "That peace doesn't diminish because you don't share it. Truth exists independently of our belief in it." 3 days later, Victoria Ashworth stood outside St. Margaret's shelter at 6:55 in the morning, her hands shaking as she reached for the familiar weathered door. Inside, she could hear the sounds of breakfast preparation, quiet conversations, and children's laughter. Margaret, the shelter director, greeted her with knowing eyes. "Victoria, His Holiness said you'd be joining us. Welcome." As Victoria stepped across the threshold into a world she had spent years avoiding, she caught sight of a small memorial corner dedicated to Emma, 7 years old, beloved daughter, whose courage in the face of death had inspired everyone who met her. For the first time in 20 years, Victoria Ashworth found herself wondering if perhaps, just perhaps, there might be more to faith than fairy tales after all. The transformation had begun, not through argument or force, but through the simple power of grace extended to someone who had no right to expect it. And sometimes that's exactly how God changes hearts.